All right, MIDI 2 class. It's our time. It's our turn. So I'm going to do my best to try to set you up for project number 3. And the idea behind project number 3 is that we're going to take a score that's already been written and we're going to try to realize that score in MIDI form. And the idea here is that you don't have to worry about composition. You can focus on how you set up the session, how you pick the instruments, getting the notes in, and then working with expressiveness, working with dynamics, possibly expressiveness through tempo changes to try to recreate the sound of that orchestral score as best that you can in a MIDI format. Obviously, it's not going to compare to a live orchestra. Even the best sound libraries in the world, as good as they are, still fall a little short of being able to express all the musicianship that's possible with a real player with a real instrument. So we're not trying to replace anybody here, but we're just trying to do the best we can to realize this music in a MIDI format so that later, when you compose your own piece, you can get it in a MIDI format that will allow others to hear your idea, for you to hear your own idea, to realize your idea, and then hopefully, eventually we can give music to an orchestra and they can actually record the piece. But as a compositional tool, being able to hear all the parts and how they fit together and the timbres of the different instruments, the different instrument families working together, it's just a great way to realize your vision in a way that gives you the feeling of an entire orchestra playing your piece. So for this example, I'm using Symphony Number 3 by Brahms. And in this movement, we've got a fairly simple orchestration in that it's mostly just woodwinds and strings, which I think is good not to overwhelm. And before we get into the actual MIDI version of this composition, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the musicianship side here. So we're basically throwing you into the deep end in terms of score study, reading a score, transposition of instruments. So let me just talk a little bit about how we read the score that I'm going to send you. So I've got my version here, and of course I'll send you a score to look at as well. And the first thing that we see when we look at the score is how it's arranged. And they've got sections here. Basically, the woodwinds are on the top and the strings are on the bottom. And because this was written by Brahms, who was German, all of the names of the instruments are in German. So you'll find that when you read scores by different composers from different parts of the world, either the names will be in French or German or Italian or could be in English. But you have to be able to kind of translate those words. Some of them are very obvious. Floten means, flute. We have oboe, clarinet, fagotte, which is basically a bassoon, horn, and then in the string section, there's violin 1, violin 2. Below that is viola, which on this chart, and I don't speak German, so I apologize to people who do, but Bratscht, that's viola. Then we have violoncello, which is basically cello, and then the contrabass, which is the big upright bass that you find in the orchestra. All right, so we have woodwinds and we have strings. So most of the woodwinds, well, many of the woodwinds are written as C instruments. And what that means is that when they write the note C on their music and they play the note C, you hear the note C. Other instruments are transposing instruments, meaning that the note that they play is not the note that you hear. And they do this for a variety of reasons in terms of keeping the range of the writing in the staff as much as possible. Some instruments, their range is kind of between the treble and the bass clef, and so they will write them with a different sort of clef so that they're not reading a bunch of ledger lines either above or below the staff. So, for instance, when you go to the string section and you look at an instrument like the viola, well, the viola kind of lives in that area in between treble clef and bass clef. So instead of writing a bunch of ledger lines, they use a different clef, and the clef that they're using is called a C clef. And if we come over to the whiteboard here, I'll give you my very crude version of it, right? So there's treble clef. There's the bass clef. In the treble clef, which we also call the G clef, we know that that note is the note G, and all the other notes are relative to that. In the bass clef, which we also call the F clef, this note here, which is in between these two dots, is the note F, thus the name F clef. Well, the C clef, which has this kind of cool I guess it's fancy. It's like two lines and then this kind of crazy. What it's doing is it's basically pointing to that middle line right there. And in this clef, that middle line represents the note middle C on the piano. Not hearing it right now, but that's okay. So middle C. So if we go back to the treble and the bass clef, middle C on the treble clef is here, and middle C on the bass clef is there, right? That's the same note, and it's right in between the two clefs. So this clef is kind of starting in between the treble and the bass clef so that we can write their notes inside of a clef, inside of a staff, and not have to write a whole bunch of ledger lines. But if you're not used to reading this clef, it's really confusing, and I'm not. I'm terrible at it. Literally awful. So what I have to do when I read stuff that's in C clef is I have to write the names of the notes next to the note because I'm just no good at it. So if we were in the key of C, in the C clef, these notes would be C, D, E, F, and G. And it really throws things off because we're so used to we're used to it not looking like that. It's really strange to see middle C written there and to see like a D on the second space from the top. It doesn't compute for me at all. So I'm just telling you right now, like if I have to read a score where the instrument is playing notes that are, in a different place, I literally just write the name of the note. So I totally encourage you to cheat and do the same thing. So the next thing I would like to address or talk about on the musicianship side is I think it's a great idea still for you to play the notes into the computer, into the DAW. There's a violin. And I'm not like a great reader. I'm okay. I can read notes, but I'm not a great reader myself. And certainly when I get into reading like in a different clef or reading different ranges or whatever, I find it challenging too. And I think for some people in this class, if you haven't done a lot of note reading, it's overwhelming. So I would like for you to at least try. And I would suggest setting the tempo very, very slow in the DAW because you can always speed it up later so that you give yourself plenty of time to react. And essentially, as painstaking and as slow as it is, what I do is I'll look, let's say, at the first violin part here. And the first violin starts off on not the pickup measure, but the first measure, playing a triplet that starts on an E flat. It goes down to a G, back to an E flat, and then up to a G. So it sounds like this. Triplet 2. So 1 triplet 2. And so I would start the DAW. You would give me a count off, and I would play just that. So if I recorded the first measure, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then I would just play that much. Put my hands on the keys, get it memorized, play that much. Then look at the next phrase that the violins play, violin 1. It plays E flat, G, E flat, up to A flat, which is kind of a stretch, but I can just get up there. So then the DAW comes in, 1, 2, 3. We hear the first lick that I played, and then we come in on beat 3. 1, 2, 3, 1. And I play the next lick. So I'm literally going through and just playing one piece at a time. And because we can record non-destructively on the DAW, I can just go in and keep adding on to the parts that I've already played. So absolutely don't feel bad about doing it that way. The first session, when you work on this project, I just want you to focus on getting the notes in with the correct pitch and rhythm. And that'll take you plenty of time. Don't worry about all the dynamic markings or expressiveness. Let's just get the notes in. And if you're having a hard time playing it in, you can, draw notes on the screen. You just got to be careful that the length of the note is correct. But as much as I can encourage you, I would say try to play the notes in. So the first day that you work on this, maybe you would just pick one instrument and you would go through and just play that one instrument one bar at a time or one phrase at a time and just get it in. Double check yourself. If you play a wrong note, no big deal. You can go back and change it in the edit window of the DAW. So what I did was I went through and I did just that. So if you look at my screen right now, you'll see that I have my session set up so that I've got all the notes in, but honestly, I've done very little in terms of getting the velocities balanced, the volumes. It's pretty raw. It's pretty rough, but I just tried to get the notes in. So what you see on my screen right now is literally just that. So just to kind of overview, get the score, figure out what the instruments are, and if there's anything in a C clef, transpose or write the names of the notes in there so that when you go to play it, you don't have to think. You can just play those keys and try to play them in yourself one piece at a time and just get pitch and rhythm. That's it. Just pitch and rhythm for all the parts. And if it doesn't sound musical, that's fine. Let's just start with that. Okay? That's step one.